"This is quite true," he said, "but to what are you alluding?" "I mean," he replied, "that our rulers will find a considerable dose of falsehood and deceit necessary for the good of their subjects. We were saying that the use of all these things regarded as medicines might be of advantage. And we were very right. And this lawful use of them seems likely to be often needed in the regulations of marriages and births." "How so?" "Why," I said, "the principle has already been laid down that the best of either sex should be united with the best as often, and the inferior with the inferior as seldom as possible, and that they should rear the offspring of the one sort of union, but not of the other, if the flock is to be maintained in first-rate condition. Now, these goings-on must be a secret which the rulers only know, or there will be a further danger of our herd, as the guardians may be termed, breaking out into rebellion." Very true. "Had we not better appoint certain festivals at which we will bring together the brides and bridegrooms, and sacrifices will be offered, and suitable hymeneal songs composed by our poets? The number of weddings is a matter which must be left to the discretion of the rulers, whose aim will be to preserve the average of population. There are many other things which they will have to consider, such as the effects of wars and diseases, and any similar agencies, in order, as far as this is possible, to prevent the state from becoming either too large or too small." "Certainly."
Welcome to Political Science. This Little Eugenicist chat is taken from Plato's Republic, a foundational text of Western political thought written some 2,400 years ago, and since then, the ideas in it keep rearing their ugly heads throughout places and eras. But is it worth reading? I'm Michael. Let's find out together. I promise to get a different mic for the next one. In the Republic, Plato sits down and constructs his ideal society from scratch. So, this might be the first utopia philosophically supported and put in writing. And he answers a simple question in it. What does a state look like if it is supposed to embody the virtues of justice and temperance? A simple question. The answer is 300 pages long, and unfortunately every single one of those pages is necessary. The best thing about ancient Greek writing is the attitude of integrating everything you know together into one whole. Remember Thales? Everything is water. What is the element that connects and the essential that connects everything we have? So when Plato constructs the Republic, he goes from the fundamentals, block by block, section by section. What is justice? Is it any good? How should a society be structured to promote justice? And how can it come about? What should the education system look like such that the Republic can defend itself and perpetuate itself? Now, as a student of Socrates, Plato very much gives us an argument, but he's also quite comfortable lying and outright justifying, constructing myths such that the social order he puts forth can be preserved. Does that ring a bell? So it is no wonder that his writing attains such a universal influence. If you look at the totality of Western political thought, there is none outside of Plato. Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, Marx, they're either with him or against him, but we cannot escape him, one way or the other. So if, like me, your first instinct is to ask, where did it all come from? Like, where is the origin? Then start here. As an example, consider the doctrine of the three estates, which up until recently was taken as basic common sense in most times and places.
"Citizens, we shall say to them in our tale, you are brothers, yet God has framed you differently. Some of you have the power of command, and in the composition of these he has mingled gold, wherefore also they have the greatest honor. Others he has made of silver, to be auxiliaries. Others again, who are to be husbandmen and craftsmen, he has composed of brass and iron, and the species will generally be preserved in the children. But as all are of the same original stock, a golden parent will sometimes have a silver son, or a silver parent a golden son. And God proclaims as a first principle to the rulers, and above all else, that there is nothing which they should so anxiously guard, or of which they are to be such good guardians, as of the purity of the race. They should observe what elements mingle in their offspring, for if the son of a golden or silver parent has an admixture of brass and iron, then nature orders a transposition of ranks, and the eye of the ruler must not be pitiful towards the child because he has to descend in the scale and become a husbandman or artisan, just as there may be sons of artisans who, having an admixture of gold or silver in them, are raised to honor, and become guardians or auxiliaries. For an oracle says that when a man of brass or iron guards the state, it will be destroyed. Such is the tale. Is there any possibility of making our citizens believe in it?
No, I got it. That's cute.
Now, post-Enlightenment, this notion is of course deeply unpleasant. But is it true? Are there natural divisions between people? Or do we all humans possess a common species equality, a capacity for autonomy, a necessary element of well-being, worth and dignity? I don't know. I am cruel enough to demand freedom even where people are forced to face the consequences of their own actions. But the idea that we don't have sharply divided social classes today is ridiculous. This book is incredibly forceful, and it comes at you in waves. A tremendous amount of attention is paid to the Platonic guardians, a sort of ruling inner party guarding the truth and laws of the Republic. Now, they are benevolent in Plato's version, and they are very carefully selected, bred, and educated to do their job. Does that ring a bell? And we don't think of our ruling class in those terms today. But are we better off for it? I'm in Dublin, and I keep hearing about democratic participation and grassroots activism and a civil society that we all built together and which curiously always seems to speak with one rainbow-colored voice. But this is shouted by the most idle, most privileged, best educated Trinity College grads and their trust fund friends. Well, maybe you're the aristocrats, and maybe you're just not doing your bloody job. Let's return to the text. Plato was a disciple of Socrates, and most of the book is written in a Socratic dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon, even though, of course, Plato puts words in his teacher's mouth. And because everything is connected, all the political conclusions are built up from fundamental philosophical reasoning. Now, in some sections, Plato leans more Socratic in style, such as in the beginning, where he refutes the notion that Thrasymachus puts forth, that injustice may be profitable. In other places, Plato breaks into new ground and builds up entire worlds. The best example is Christianity. Now, I love my Christian friends, but if they can join me for a moment and accept that Christian theology is a human product, you can see how mysticism became an intellectual movement in the West through Plato. It's right here on page 197. The following excerpt is long, but it explains 1,000 years of Western thought that followed.
Yes, I said, there is a great deal more. Then omit nothing, however slight. I will do my best, I said, but I should think that a great deal will have to be omitted. You have to imagine, then, that there are two ruling powers, and that one of them is set over the intellectual world, the other over the visible. I do not say heaven, lest you should fancy that I am playing upon the name. May I suppose that you have this distinction of the visible and intelligible fixed in your mind? I have. Now, take a line which has been cut into two unequal parts, and divide each of them again in the same proportion. And suppose the two main divisions to answer, one to the visible and the other to the intelligible. And then compare the subdivisions in respect to their clearness and want of clearness, and you will find that the first section in the sphere of the visible consists of images. And by images I mean in the first place shadows, and in the second place reflections in water and in solid, smooth and polished bodies, and the like. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Imagine now the other section, of which this is only the resemblance, to include the animals which we see and everything that grows or is made. Very good. Would you not admit that both the sections of this division have different degrees of truth, and that the copy is to the original as the sphere of opinion is to the sphere of knowledge? Most undoubtedly. Next, proceed to consider the manner in which the sphere of the intellectual is to be divided. In what manner? Thus, there are two subdivisions, in the lower of which the soul uses the figures given by the former division as images. The inquiry can only be hypothetical, and instead of going upwards to a principle descends to the other end. In the higher of the two, the soul passes out of hypotheses and goes up to a principle which is above hypotheses, making no use of images as in the former case, but proceeding only in and through the ideas themselves.
And so our concepts were cut in half. He opens up a chasm between what we can see and what we can understand, and makes these two go to war. And as the ages progress, the confusion mutates. The shadows versus the ideas, the changing versus the eternal, the worldly versus the divine, the empiricists versus the rationalists, the necessary versus the contingent, the phenomenal world versus the noumenal world, reality as it appears versus reality as it is. You could not invent a more destructive doctrine, so this is his crime, one of many. And due to the influence of Neoplatonists like Plotinus, there is a great deal of Platonic influence in the Christian concept of God, of the heavenly and the earthly world, of transcendence and the immortal soul. Thankfully, Aristotle managed to redeem us, but more on that later. Let's take another turn, which will also look familiar. As we bring up the guardians of our state, we must make sure that the warriors are brought up in the right way. So we take them along on expeditions as they are young, but on fast horses so that they may escape and live if things take the wrong turn. We must also make sure that the music they listen to and the poetry they read doesn't make them overly harsh or overly gentle. We must strike a balance between gentleness and courage.
Yet surely, I said, the ferocity only comes from spirit, which, if rightly educated, would give courage, but if too much intensified, is liable to become hard and brutal. That I quite think. On the other hand, the philosopher will have the quality of gentleness, and this also, when too much indulged, will turn into softness, but if educated rightly, will be gentle and moderate. True. And in our opinion, the guardians ought to have both these qualities. Assuredly, and both should be in harmony, beyond question. And the harmonious soul is both temperate and courageous, yes, and the inharmonious is cowardly and boorish. Very true. And when a man allows music to play upon him and to pour into his soul through the funnel of his ears those sweet and soft and melancholy airs of which we were just now speaking, and his whole life is passed in walling and the delights of song, in the first stage of the process, the passion and spirit which is in him is tempered like iron, and made useful, instead of brittle and senseless. But, If he carries on the softening and soothing process, in the next stage he begins to melt and waste, until he has wasted away his spirit and cut out the sinews of his soul, and he becomes a feeble warrior. Very true.
I like to think he tried to protect us against sissy hypno. Well, mission failed. But I must confess, it was refreshing to see it spelled out that the rulers should adopt deceit and censorship and eugenics to promote civic virtue. That makes life much easier than having to tease it out of people today. So the blueprint is deeply totalitarian. You are owned by the state, and the state reduces you to a part of a social organism and governs every aspect of your life accordingly. Yet Plato also seems earnestly interested in guarding a different kind of freedom. A freedom from slavery to inner passions that brings about things like tyranny and injustice and addiction. That, and also the simple, straightforward freedom of the nation from being subjugated by its neighbors. Now, he is quite comfortable pursuing this paternalistic kind of freedom at the price of lying to the commoners and curbing their autonomy. Of course, it's never going to work, but he's by no means the last one to try. The second virtue of the Republic is meant to be temperance. Plato is deeply concerned that his state will degenerate due to luxury and indulgence, and this is where my favorite passage comes in. On page 111, he explains why it is especially important for the guardians to maintain a high standard of personal greatness in their ranks, or the whole thing falls apart.
And so I say to you, do not compel us to assign to the guardians a sort of happiness which will make them anything but guardians. For we too can clothe our husbandmen in royal apparel, and set crowns of gold on their heads, and bid them till the ground as much as they like, and no more. Our potters also might be allowed to repose on couches, and feast by the fireside, passing round the wine cup, while their wheel is conveniently at hand, and working at pottery only as much as they like. In this way we might make every class happy, and then, as you imagine, the whole state would be happy. But do not put this idea into our heads, for if we listen to you, the husbandman will no longer be a husbandman, the potter will cease to be a potter, and no one will have the character of any distinct class in the state. Now, this is not of much consequence where the corruption of society and pretension to be what you are not is confined to cobblers. But when the guardians of the laws and of the government are only seeming and not real guardians, then see how they turn the state upside down, and on the other hand, they alone have the power of giving order and happiness to the state. We mean our guardians to be true saviors and not the destroyers of the state, whereas our opponent is thinking of peasants at a festival, who are enjoying a life of revelry, not of citizens who are doing their duty to the state. But if so, we mean different things, and he is speaking of something which is not a state, and therefore we must consider whether in appointing our guardians we would look to their greatest happiness individually, or whether this principle of happiness does not rather reside in the state as a whole.
So, is the Republic worth reading? Perhaps not, if you're not interested in statecraft, but just because you're not into politics doesn't mean politics isn't into you. So, I recommend it in self-defense. It reads very well, and frankly helps us raise our bar for what we accept as political thought. Thank you for watching the 4th episode. This book on political science closes the first round. Close related pieces in the series include Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and Homer's Iliad, or really any other video on the channel. So check those out, and then turn me off, pick up a book, and live your life. Hello, saying hi. Yes. Do you need the room?
No, I'm just making sure that's working.
Yes, thank you.